People, let's get to the conversation that we earlier promised you on HIV/AIDS, the world marking World AIDS Day today. We asked why the stigma surrounding HIV/AIDS is still a problem. Why has it been a static over the years? And joining me to discuss matters HIV and, of course, the day is Chris Ouma, public health consultant, health rights and advocate. Chris Ouma, many thanks for making time for us.
Many thanks, and thank you for having me this day.
Okay, it was October 20th, 1987, the first time in history that a health issue was discussed in the UN General Assembly. The then World Health Organization Director General said, and I quote, "Let us not underestimate the challenge before us. A worldwide effort will be required to stop AIDS." He said, yes, we can. We must win the global war. More than 30 years, if not close to 30 years, since those statements were uttered, it seems as though the world has not won the fight against HIV/AIDS. Why does it seem so?
Oh, first of all, let me also join you in sending our condolences to the American people, because America has been a very key partner in the HIV and AIDS debate globally. Secondly, December 1st is a very important day. And reason as to why I say it's important, because there are three key things that we need to look at. There is an element of good wishes in terms of how we relate as human beings. There's an element of faithfulness, and then there's the element of respect. And these are three key elements that are very, very important in HIV and AIDS agenda. Now, getting back to your question, we all know the history of HIV right from 1984. And by then, we can actually say that the world was caught unaware. And
caught unaware by the virus?
In the sense that we were not really at a level to be able to discern what the disease was. Because historically, if you follow, the world has suffered from three major challenges, or what I would call the crisis. Mm-hmm. One of the things that humanity has faced over many years from the evolutionary history is a question of famine or hunger. Mm-hmm. Number two has been plague, or what we call diseases. Mm-hmm. And number three is actually what we call war or violence. So those are the three key thematic areas that has actually made humanity really trigger through.
Fair enough. You say the world has been caught unaware, if
yes.
not humanity has been caught unaware.
Sure.
Today is the World AIDS Day. In fact, the 30th anniversary of this particular day. 30 plus years. That doesn't sound the world that was caught unaware.
Why I say it was caught unaware, because if you follow the global history in terms of the progress that has been made towards HIV/AIDS prevention, treatment and care, in the early years of the 80s, we are talking about the capacity to be able to diagnose, be able to identify which virus. So if you follow in history, by then we didn't have the necessary technological, or what I would call the sophistication within the health industry to be able to diagnose appropriately and actually determine what virus this was or what disease this was by then.
Which begs the question, is the virus clever than the human mind? It seems as though it is.
Interesting. Would say a yes or a no, but again, I say the whole question about response in disease, actually the preparedness. Mm-hmm. Let's say, for example, in the early years when you had the smallpox as a crisis, mm-hmm. and millions and millions of people were dying because the world didn't know what this disease was. But let's fast forward to, let's say, for example, in 2014, 2015, we've had SARS virus, we've had H1N1, the flu virus, we've had Ebola in West Africa, and you could actually see how relevant bodies, including the World Health Organization, has actually been able to respond to this kind of a health crisis. So that's what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. By then, the 80s, the sophistication and the ability to be able to determine and correctly diagnose was actually a miss. But presently, I think we are really at an advanced stage.
Okay, hold on that thought. I understand we need to cross over to Voi, where the Standard Group is celebrating 100 years of existence. Michael Gitonga is on standby from there. Let's listen into that.
So we are going to the Tsavo because we feel we also need to start telling a certain story. Remember, the Tsavo is very historic. If you remember the man-eaters of Tsavo, if you remember the World War I heritage sites. So there's a lot that we need to make sure that as we get into the next century of our existence, we carry all this along with us and nothing is left behind.
All right. Well, we'll be catching up with you again, Sophia. We're looking forward to a wonderful and a great day. What is, in your expectation, the highlight for the day?
I think for me is a little bit more of the history, because it's amazing. As we said, 100 years is quite something. It's one of those things many businesses don't get to even a year, 2 years. So we're talking about 100 years. Absolutely. That is something. So to learn, and we'll be hearing from some of the former employees in the Standard Group telling us how it was in earlier days, the journey. So we'll learn about that. But we're in good company, because today down in South Africa, it's also 100 years since Nelson Mandela was born. So his legacy lives on. There's a huge celebration over there. Big stars around the world have gathered to celebrate him as well today. So you can see which company we keep in as far as 100 years is concerned. But it's been 116 years of the Standard newspaper itself.
Right.
So we'll be telling you so much more. Stay with us throughout this journey, learn more, and also tell us some of your memories. For as long as you've been reading the paper or watching KTN, what do you remember? Because we saw the hashtag Standard Group 100 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
I don't know what you remember from them days, but I remember some of the presenters that we had. Who are those anchors that you remember from back in the day? And when you look at when it was Channel 62 for KTN News, and that's just been the journey that we have walked so far. So you're welcome to participate in this conversation and let us know what that has been. So we're looking forward to a great day.
Yes, so talk to us on social media. We'll be sampling some of your tweets and, of course, engaging throughout the day. You are watching KTN.
Standard Group, 100 years of bringing your world to you.
Well, indeed, you're watching us live on KTN News as the celebrations of the Standard Group marking 100 plus years continues. Let's get to the conversation that we were earlier having in the studio. Chris, before we went, of course, to cross over to the celebrations, you talked of the cleverness, probably of the virus, and that man has been trying to find solution to curb HIV/AIDS. Let's get to the theme of today. The theme of today is know your status. I wonder, what is the importance in as far as knowing one's status is concerned?
Okay, thank you. First of all, we must appreciate that despite the hands-off kind of an experience at the very beginning of the conversation around HIV, a lot of effort has been made, and we're actually on a positive scale, globally and even as a country. And one of the key indicators that we need to look at if the war on HIV and AIDS has to be won is the question of getting to know the status of each and every individual within the population. And if you look at the numbers that we have globally, we are talking of about 3 in 4, about 75% of individuals across the population knowing their HIV. So we want this segment...
Meaning 25% do not know their status.
Do not know. And what is the risk of that?
What is the danger of not knowing your status?
Exactly. So, and then in Africa, what we call the sub-Saharan region, we are talking of 4 out of 5. So about 80%. So there's another gap of about 20. And even bring it back home, there is still a number of Kenyans who have not attempted to take the test. And now what is the risk, as you've actually put it, that if we have within our population that number that do not know their status. And remember, HIV is not a preserve or a particular population. We are saying it's actually generalized within the population. So it's really important that each and every person, whether adult, children, get to know their status, because it is only through knowing your status, then we actually take the initiative to be able to act or behave in a way that will actually enable you to either live positively and live longer, or act or behave in a manner that you can actually keep you negative.
Fair enough. The health CS, Cecily Kariuki, said that 40% of all new HIV infections occur among the adolescents who are aged between 15 to 24. This must be a scary data.
Yeah, it's scary. And I'm just looking at a recent report that was launched by National AIDS Control Council and NASCOP, I think last month, on the new estimate for 2018. And if you look at those figures, first of all, we must commend the various actors in the industry in terms of the work that have been going on, because we see a reduction in incidence. Currently, nationally, it stands at 4.9. So each year, we actually see a reduction in the...
But there's equally an increase, even though we are seeing a reduction now at this pace.
And that's the dynamic part in terms of which segment of the population and what does that really mean for the general population and the actors themselves. When you talk about young people 15 to 24, we are talking about 184,000 young people who are HIV infected. Again, there is a disproportionate angle in terms of which gender is affected. You get more women in the general population, and again, within the youthful population affected. And look at even Nairobi, for example. Out of the 52,800 new infections that were reported in 2017, a chunk of that is actually reported within Nairobi, where we're actually having vibrant young population, the middle class, majority who are still in universities and colleges.
Fair enough. 40% of all new infections aged between 15 to 24. Why is there an increase in as far as the percentage of new infections among the youth is concerned? Why is there an increase?
So that's what I was coming to, because I was actually trying to drive the point to, in terms of geographical location and also in terms of the lifestyle. Because if we look at the numbers, geographically, Nyanza and Western regions still report high prevalence rate. But shockingly, is the young population within the urban setup seem to be having higher incidences. So we're asking ourselves, is it a question of a lifestyle? Because knowledge, for me, within the Kenyan population, and by and large, both rural and urban, is actually what we would call universal. So there's good understanding of HIV in terms of what it is.
And when you talk of lifestyle, what exactly do you mean?
So what would that mean? Basically, we're saying either practices that relates to transmission. And we're not just talking about sexual activities, because there are a number of other means through which HIV is transmitted.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So the question that we should be asking ourselves, how is the sexual practice within that population? And we've actually seen, even from the reports that have been given by the Ministry of Education, from our schools, increased use of drugs amongst young people. We've actually seen that. There's a lot into risky behavior, apart from just drugs, in terms of how we see young people interact with certain spaces and interact amongst themselves. Because you get young girls, for example, they get more scared of getting pregnant, and they know there's a pill as compared to contracting HIV and AIDS.
Fair enough. Sexual transmission of HIV AIDS accounts for 93.7%. Of course, this is not the only way in which HIV is, of course, transmitted. What are some of the other ways in which HIV can be transmitted?
HIV, as you rightly put it, of course, contributes to the highest proportion when it actually talks about the HIV transmission. But one of the major campaigns that has been there is actually the mother-to-child transmission, and today we are talking about elimination of mother-to-child transmission. So that's an area that the country is making a lot of progress, but we should actually be aware that there are still mothers who are not able to access services in the healthcare facilities, and therefore at time of delivery, they end up transmitting to their unborn or their children. Number two, there's a population that we don't talk about, and unfortunately even the report that was released by NAC and by NASCOP last month did not capture them. These are the key population. Again, if you look at the drivers, key population is actually high-risk population, okay? And when I talk about the key population, I'm talking about MSM, I'm talking about sex workers, I'm talking about people who use drugs. So we know programs that have been there. People who use drugs, they're those who inject themselves. So if they're injecting themselves, are we providing safer pharma products, for example, needles, through what we call the needle syringe exchange program? And are they able to access? Remember, a key population in our country, they are criminalized. And therefore, most of the activities, quote unquote, are done in hiding. And therefore, we need really to reach out to them and also highlight, because they're contributing this number.
And when you talk of the population that is being criminalized, which population is this?
What I actually generalize and refer to as the key population, who are key drivers, again, if you look at the statistics. And unfortunately, sometimes the conversations tend to push them to the back seat. So it's really important that, again, we look at that in terms of the key population, people who inject drugs, because there's a lot that is happening around that. There's a vulnerability that comes in the sex work in terms of negotiation and even the economic, socioeconomic challenges in our communities. So we have sex workers who are within the sector, but they are either not able to negotiate and therefore have an unprotected sex, and that definitely
hence get the virus.
Yes.
30 plus years of HIV's existence, to use for the lack of a better word, the question of stigma still hangs around. Why has it become difficult for humanity in general, people in totality, to disassociate whatever is associated with HIV and treat it as a disease, just a normal disease?
Yeah, it's a bit of a worry when you talk about stigma and discrimination in our communities. And I do not want to generalize, but one thing that we have to appreciate is the fact that the campaigns that have been carried out have been yielding some results in terms of getting the information out there. If you compare what was happening in the early 90s, I think there was a lot of stigma around even issues from the community to our social structures, to an extent that we see people were openly abandoned, discriminated, and people could not even share a table or even do a handshake. And currently, if you look at what's happening, I think there are a lot of things that have been demystified. The spaces we have tried to bridge in terms of social interaction, but there are still some other elements that are actually contributing to stigma and discrimination. One of the things that we need to look at is in terms of our laws, because I told you the key population is a very important cohort in the whole discussion around HIV. But social, legal, and even political dimension that we take contribute to that stigma.
Whereas there could be a progress made, there is often as well the question of equating HIV to many things. Let's be fair. Stigma still hangs around as a burden. Will it be possible to have a zero stigma associated with HIV, just like someone having malaria or any other disease? Will it be possible? Or am I being too futuristic?
It's good to be futuristic and optimistic as well. For me, I have no doubt. I strongly believe that we are going to defeat the whole war against HIV. Because if I look at the progress that has been made around other diseases, as I mentioned at the beginning, that the world has been under crisis of 3 major incidences. So there is hope it would be won. But the whole debate will actually depend on how best we create a platform and bring everyone on board. Because why I say so, if you look at the national government in terms of their approach to HIV, they've done very good policy frameworks and structures, even to engage the key population, which is actually key.
Best on paper. Many a times.
Yes.
Best on paper.
Best on paper.
It doesn't trickle down to someone who has HIV. For instance, from where I come from, which is Mandera. Those people are still regarded within the society as people who are carrying a foreign disease.
Sure. So that's what I was coming to. So if you look at, for example, the Ministry of Health and a lot of work coordinated by NASCOP, we have a technical working group and a KP platform at the national government. But in terms of, are we really giving space? Because we have what we call the a prevention revolution roadmap, and talks about a paradigm shift. And one of the key areas that we need to look at in terms of how then do we change the approach from facility-based into a community-based, and the population actually participating in this. So if we have that platform that is supposed to have a candid conversation, where is the position of a KP, who is actually a key affected population in the whole debate about HIV and AIDS?
Fair enough. We talked of 30 plus years, and this is a term limit that I'm often making reference to. Yeah. 30 plus years as well of HIV AIDS. The cure is elusive. Why is it difficult to have a cure for HIV AIDS?
First of all, I must say we must understand that we are talking about a virus. We are not talking about a bacteria or a fungi, because then, again, those ones, it's been easy. We have a lot of antibiotics, so response to, and actually global response to communicable diseases as a result of bacterial cost is easier. But if you look, a virus, a little bit of a trick, and that's why all of us still continue experiencing flu. Homa, it's a virus, and therefore we're already thinking in terms of vaccines. And if you ask me where are we, I think tremendous progress and really on the right path. So for me, an optimist, I think it will be possible one day that we'll just hit that button and the drug will be there. And not just being there, but being there for those who need it most. Because I know in certain parts of the world, people are actually accessing a form of management that can actually prolong and, live a comfortable life.
Fair enough, Chris. As we conclude this conversation, the theme of today, of course, is know your status. Probably to someone who is watching us now, what will you tell them?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that 2018 World AIDS Day is a very important day, as you kept on reiterating that we are talking about 30 years down the line. And 30 years for me down the line in terms of talking about one single disease, it's time for each one of us to pay attention and really listen to that call, because a call is being made. Last year we talked about the right to health. That was the theme of 2017. Yes. 2018, we're asking all of us to take a moment and get to know our status. That is the first step toward winning the war on HIV and AIDS. Number two, it is important because as a nation, we are talking about a Big Four agenda. And one of the components of the Big Four programs is actually the universal health coverage. And I know WHO has actually captured in the 2018 conversation what they're actually calling health for all. So it is really important that policymakers, especially the legislators in this country, also think in terms of how to integrate HIV component into any discussion on policies and making sure that the universal healthcare program actually provides a comprehensive approach and support for the entire population on HIV response.
Fair enough. Chris Ouma, public health consultant, health and rights advocate. Many thanks for making time for us this morning. We are taking a short commercial break, but before we do that, let's get to some breaking news now. George Herbert Walker Bush, the 41st U.S. president, has died